We've reached the last chapter of this incredible story of Salvatore Ferragamo. We've heard the patter of his tiny feet in Bonito and the sounds of the shoemaker workshops in Naples at the turn of the last century. We've crossed the ocean into the USA. From Boston with its deafening clangs of industry, we followed him to sunny California. We've been dazzled by the stars of silent movies, and we've waltzed with them through the American dream. We've returned to Italy in Florence, and we followed him in the creation of a purely Italian company. We've seen him fall, surrounded by the explosions of the Second World War, and we've seen him get up thanks to the power of love. We've cheered at his accomplishments. We've been dazzled by his success. But most importantly, we've learned to listen a little bit more to our feet. Salvatore teaches us that they are the ones that can bring us where we want. This is a story of Salvatore Ferragamo, Shoemaker of Dreams. A podcast series from Cora Media for Museo Ferragamo. Episode 8, The Challenge of the Future. It's the 50s, the golden age of industrial capitalism. The world is changing fast, and Salvatore sees it just in time.
The crafts of handmade shoes no longer appealed to youth. There was easier work to be done, and easier wages were to be earned at the machines of a score of industries. Why then spend hours crouching over a last working with mid-care and skill?
Elvira Valeri illustrates us the deep social changes taking place in the 50s.
For the first time, there's a breach in the barrier between the countryside and city. From north to south, millions of Italians start sending their children to school, and they believe there may be an opportunity and even a choice between the two worlds. The statistics of the time reveal a sudden but uncontrolled cycle of growth. They tell the tale of cities of the north that are growing and the countryside that is suddenly empty. In just a few years, Italy is covered in motorways, motels, gas stations, and neon lights. Even in most of the south, where the motorways haven't arrived yet, nor have the profits, the influence of this new Italy is clear. The Italy of the 60s is no longer just an exporter, but it starts to see an internal market as well, in which materials and ideas circulate, and in which there's a strong push for new ways of life. Food and clothing habits are changing, as is the use of free time. Now people watch TV for hours, and they all buy the same products. The Italy of these years is radically different.
Salvatore understands that in a few years, the sheer cost of keeping up an entirely handcrafted production will make it impossible to stay economically viable. His shoes will just be too expensive, and mass production will push him out of the market. The only way to survive is to make peace with the machine, but he does it in his own way.
So I went in search of a manufacturer who would be prepared to work faithfully to my principles, my lasts, my patterns, and my designs, and who would be prepared to incorporate a large percentage of handwork in my products. I began my search in England. For several years, I experimented, and at last I found what I needed. The result was the appearance on the British market of Ferrina shoes by Ferragamo. Shoes made to my principles, which were 60% handmade, the other 40%, the minor tasks, were done by machine.
Salvatore has finally managed to bring together industry and craftsmanship, which is the dream that he's held since his days in Hollywood. In 1950, Salvatore is 52 years old, and he's at the peak of his career. That same year sees the birth of Fulvia, followed by Leonardo in 1953 and Massimo in 1957. Wanda is always elegant and smiling, the ideal image of a wife in the 50s. Melania Mazzucco, in her introduction to Ta's Red Book, written by the granddaughter Ginevra Visconti, describes her like this. She organizes parties for children, teaches dance steps to her teenage daughters, plays with the dogs, follows the agricultural work and honey production on the country estate. With firmness and sweetness, she instills in her children the values that their parents impressed upon her and Salvatore. Earning privileges, behaving well, respecting adults, taking care of appearances and good manners in every circumstance. Salvatore spends this little free time he has with his family. One of his great pleasures is having lunch at Wanda's perfectly laid dining table. On Sundays, everyone goes to the country house together. Salvatore loves the earth and being in contact with nature. For the rest of the week from 8:30 in the morning, he sits in his office of Palazzo Spini Ferroni. Here he receives clients and buyers, and he experiments in his laboratory. He still has many projects and many ideas to develop, as Stefania Ricci explains.
Heels and soles are at the center of development for all the 50s. One of his most successful patents is a boot that apparently has a low heel, or even no heel at all, but actually hides a small cork wedge that makes the wearer feel as if they're wearing a small heel. The upper side is embroidered in the style of the dress worn by the figurine of the Maharata bride of the 18th century, held in the Stibbert Museum of Florence. This is proof of the many inspirations in Ferragamo's creative life. In 1952, Salvatore patents a high-heeled open shoe, or décolleté. Its unique quality is the arch of the foot, that which shoemakers call fiosso, covered in the same leather as the upper part. This invention requires a complex production process, but makes the shoe as flexible as a glove. And that's why the press calls it gloved arch. A symbol of all of Ferragamo's work during these years is the construction of a metal sole, which culminates in an 18-carat gold shoe made for an anonymous American customer that costs $1,000 at the time. The processing is carried out by the goldsmiths of the Ponte Vecchio. Remarkably, the decorative elements are inspired by Florentine goldsmithing, such as the silver liturgical packs at the Bargello Museum and the cups of the Medici treasure of the Argenti Museum in Palazzo Pitti.
There is no limit to beauty, no saturation point in design, no end to materials a shoemaker may use to decorate his creations, so that every woman may be shod like a princess, and a princess may be shod like a fairy queen. I have used diamonds and pearls, real and imitation, gold and silver dust, fine leathers, satins and silks, lace and needlework, glass and glass mirrors, feathers, the skins of ostrich, antelope, kangaroo, leopard, lizard, python, water snakes, and even more weird and strange reptiles. I have used beads, sequins, nylon, and transparent paper straw. I have decorated shoes with microscopic beads and with exquisite embroidery. I have wrought cunning designs with twists and twirls, bunches and bows, whorls, squares, circles, and every angle known to geometry.
One of the most bizarre and unique materials used are those for the shoes of Eva Peron, who he meets in 1947 during her Italian stop while traveling through Europe.
She had the wildness of the Andes in her feet and the wildness of extravagance in her demands. There are some skins that are uncommercial because they are too rare or too heavy or cannot be processed or are too small. Eva Peron dismissed all difficulties. She must have the skins she demanded, not only the fairly common llama, but armadillo, lizard, and every rare reptile. Some of the shoes had to be painted with oils because the skins would not take the dye, or others had to be dusted with gold and silver.
As we know, Salvatore loves unusual and poor materials, although some of these experimentations were born of necessity, such as the use of cork or chocolate wrapping during the autarkic period. In a similar manner, during the Second World War, due to the lack of leather, Salvatore tried to use the skin of the so-called sea leopard, which is a fish found in the North Sea. However, the results weren't ideal. The skin was too difficult to tan, and it stank. Salvatore abandons the idea until the 50s, when he gets in touch with a company of Copenhagen that knows how to treat the skin properly and how to dye it.
The results are marvelous. You can obtain in sea leopard skin a variety and richness of hues that cannot be obtained with even the finest leathers. To celebrate the discovery, I organized a party in Rome with Sophia Loren as the guest of honor, and Sea Leopard was launched on its all-conquering career.
The international press widely reports the event, and even the Danish Queen Ingrid commissions for herself and her daughters the sea leopard shoes in several models and colors. We know that even Marilyn Monroe in 1954, when she moves to New York to attend the Actors Studio, becomes a regular of the Ferragamo shop in Park Avenue 424. Marilyn and Salvatore will never meet, but the actress orders many pairs of his shoes over the years, always the same models. 2 very similar décolletés with an 11-centimeter heel. She'll also wear these on set, as can be seen in her signature sexy step, and a pair of tied ballerina shoes for her free time. In the company archive, you'll find the original orders of the sex symbol's purchases and the shoes from her wardrobe, including the iconic décolletés covered in red Swarovski that Salvatore crafted just for her.
Which of all materials is my favorite? None, or rather, all. The material I work with today is my favorite today, but tomorrow there will be something new, and the day after tomorrow, something newer still.
Constant tension towards the future is an aspect that Salvatore shares with one of his most famous clients.
Marlene Dietrich, surely the possessor of the most beautiful legs, ankles, and feet in the world, has one virtue as a customer that especially appeals to me as a designer. When I have created a new style, it is for me at once already old. I cannot even be bothered to look at it again unless I have a special reason. There is always something more beautiful and more perfect still to be created. Marlene asks for the most up-to-date in fashion styles, wears the shoes once or twice, enjoys their beauty to the full, and then casts them aside. She too looks for the beauty and perfection of the future.
With this attitude, not only does Salvatore live perfectly in his own time, but he's sometimes ahead of it. Often he'll even set aside a new model and launch it a few years later, knowing perfectly well that it was too innovative to be successful just yet. Other times his creations are perfectly in line with similar trends in design, art, and architecture, as Stefania Ricci tells us.
Le scarpe di Ferragamo sono...
Ferragamo shoes are often architectural structures, which is quite typical of Italian design. We can find inspiration from architecture, such as Gaudí in the famous cage heels, or in the shell sole, where Ferragamo brings together the style of Native American slippers, where the sole rises to the upper part, and the design of Arne Jacobsen's egg chairs, which are clearly inspired by Ferragamo's style
Le
themselves.
scarpe di Ferragamo è tutt'altro che arbitrario.
As Wanda tells us, other designers copy Salvatore's models as soon as they make it onto the market. She said, "Once we went around Florence. I stopped to look at the window of a shoe store where a copy of a Salvatore model was on display. Angry and agitated, I showed him those shoes, but he laughed and told me, 'As long as they copy me, it means I'm on the right track. You'll only have to worry when you no longer see copies of my models around.'" Wanda, in her biography, recalls, Salvatore's attitude was always positive. "I believe that we were able to overcome even the horrors of war thanks to his disposition to always see the light in the darkness, the opportunities in the problems. He doesn't know it, But by sharing his life and his work with Wanda, he's passing down teachings that will be essential for her in what will soon happen. We're halfway through the 50s when Salvatore changes the corporate structure of the company, as if predicting the future. Stefania Ricci tells us about this.
La progressiva affermazione del
With the success of made-in-Italy products on the international market comes a great internal demand and a demand for accessories. So, Salvatore feels that he'll need a new corporate structure. In a way, this comes to fruition with the entrance of his wife Wanda in the company, with 500 shares, and the appointment of his nephew Girolamo, Jerry, on the board of directors, who has been working with his uncle inside the company since the 50s, with an eye for shoe structure and the fitting system. This restructuring is part of a larger project in which the company broadens its scope and diversifies towards a total look, dressing clients from toe to head. With 6 children, this is how he hopes all 6 of them can collaborate in the family business.
una collocazione nell'azienda di famiglia.
Salvatore's dream is that each of his children take part in building a great fashion company. The first of his daughters to take up the challenge is Fiamma, who after school starts an apprenticeship with her father. In 1957, Giovanna, now 14 years old, enrolls in a fashion design school, and in 1959 she presents her first collection of sportswear and beachwear in New York. Salvatore is proud of his daughters. He loves working by their side. In September 1958, Salvatore is invited by the American Woman Weekly to take a long trip to Australia with several stops. Bombay and Calcutta, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Manila. On the way back, Honolulu and California. The trip lasts about a month, and it helps form the backbone of future distribution in the Asian market. Wanda misses Salvatore despite the lovely letters that he sends her almost every day. She even memorizes some of them, such as the one that Salvatore sends from Paris, one of the last stops on the trip.
My dearest, I arrived in Paris tonight, and I'm now so close to being home with you and the children once more. After dinner, I took a walk around the city, but I soon went back to the hotel because without you by my side, even the beauty of Paris is painful. I don't want anything if I can't share it with you. I'll be home soon.
It's time to come home. Wanda rushes to the airport of Rome. As soon as Salvatore gets off the plane, Wanda notices that something's wrong. She's never seen him so tired and worn out. Instead of returning to Florence, she convinces him to take a few days' vacation in Capri, their favorite place. When we returned to Florence, Wanda writes after a few days, I thought everything was over. But soon after, Salvatore began to feel unwell. He never complained and continued to work, trying to hide his discomfort from all of us. But I insisted that he have some tests done. After a series of analyses and x-rays, the doctors discovered a liver tumor. They operated on him, but it was too late. It was a shock. We returned home and tried to continue living our everyday life. Despite his illness, Salvatore continues to think about the future of his company, as Stefania Ricci tells us.
Alla fine degli anni 50,
At the end of the 50s, Ferragamo still feels active and energetic. He wants to come up with new ideas. He even thinks up a shoe with 6 upper parts, an entire wardrobe at the price of just a pair of shoes. Unfortunately, his health conditions were already bad after Australia in 1958, and they only get worse. So, in July 1960, he decides to assign his wife, Wanda, greater powers for the ordinary and extraordinary management of the company, and this brings about an increase in corporate capital from 3.5 million to almost 50 million lira, for the most part in her name. This is the prelude to Wanda's succession as head and director of the company, which will take place shortly after.
di lì ad un mese dopo.
As Salvatore writes in his autobiography, A man like him would wish that every day lasted 100 days. To follow all of his ideas and create everything he can come up with. But time goes on and on until it pours into the great sea of what we call eternity. It's August the 7th, 1960, when in Versilia, in the area of Fiumetto, the shoemaker of dreams, the man who transformed the shoe into a work of art, dies. Wanda is devastated. There are no words to describe her pain. She's 39 years old with 6 children from 3 to 18 years of age to raise on her own. And there's a company without the soul of its founder. No one dares think of Wanda as the heir to Salvatore. This is still the early 60s, and with rare exceptions, women cannot lead fashion companies. Anyone would bet for Wanda to leave everything to a general manager or to sell it all to the highest bidder. It's not for a lack of offers. Ferragamo is a successful company, and there's a fortune just sitting on Salvatore's desk in Palazzo Spini Ferroni, new projects and many that are still to come. Melania Mazzucco tells us of those days. The young widow needs solitude to be able to abandon herself to despair. She separates herself from her children, to whom she cannot show herself dejected and insecure, and takes refuge in a hotel. Negative thoughts last little. Her husband is dead and yet present in her and almost next to her. Salvatore had 2 dreams: to expand the Ferragamo market, no longer just shoes, but a complete fashion company, or from toe to head, as Ferragamo would say, and to involve his children into the company. She knows she was born to realize Salvatore's dreams, not to kill them. She must become the body to complete them. The joy that her husband gave her must become energy. At the reopening of the factory after the August holidays, she surprises everyone. Mrs. Wanda will not sell. She will be the new director of Ferragamo. Ever since Bonito, at the age of 9, when he made his first white shoes for his sister's communion, Salvatore felt inside a secret that followed him his whole life. We die and are reborn many times working to bring our job, our vocation to fruition. Each life is a metamorphosis and a transformation. Every end is a beginning. Salvatore understood this instinctively as a child, and by the end of his life, it became a full realization. The last words of his autobiography aren't a farewell. They're a greeting from the future, from a time when every day will be worth 100.
Yet, I have no need to worry. I shall go on forever. I am still perfecting myself with the work I have to do in the future, the work to which I have been called. I have plenty of time. I know I'm going to do it. If it is not done with this body, it will be done with another. We are all flowing with the eternal tide, and of the eternal tide only is there no end.
You have listened to a podcast by Cora Media for Museo Ferragamo. Written by Rosella Bettinardi. Editing by Davide Savelli. Executive producer is Lia Chiovari. English version translated by John Vincent Aquilecchia, with the participation of Stefania Ricci, Elvira Valleri. Voice of Salvatore Ferragamo, Eric Alexander. Narrator, Caterina Yuca Sforza. Voice of Stefania Ricci, Liliana Oliveri. Voice of Elvira Valleri, Jenny Elizabeth Kuehl. For Museo Ferragamo, editorial supervision by Stefania Ricci and Ludovica Barabino. Editorial coordination by Paola Gusella. Sound and music supervision by Luca Micheli. Post-production and sound design by Mattia Licciotti. Sound engineer Luca Possi.